All right. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so last week, if you remember, we started going over CSS. So I'll do a really quick kind of review of what we had learned. We talked about, using CSS for classes, IDs, and I'll show a quick example. I need to move this there. That'll probably be in the way later, but that's okay. So for example, there's a nice checkerboard example on CodeHS. So there we have a table and we have these two classes. One is called red, one's called black. And those classes are setting the background color. And if you remember, a class is denoted by a dot and then the name of the class. And then up here where it says the TD, this is setting CSS for all of the table data tags. So all of the elements, if you don't have a dot in front of it, that's what that's saying. So the elements background color is supposed to be blue, but we're changing them to red or black. So if I come here and take off that class, this one gets changed to blue. And then the last thing that we had learned about were IDs. So we can add an ID selector to say if I wanted to make something green, spell green first. So if I wanted to make something green, and say ID green, not just green. And that one is green. So what I wanted to touch on, first of all, so these are the three different ways you can create CSS for the HTML code that you're writing, right? So you have the first one is your tags, classes, and IDs. And now this is where we're going to get into what's called the cascading part of CSS. So CSS stands for cascading style sheet. And what cascading means is basically the order of importance of your different styles. And so it has to do with what happens when you have multiple styles tied to the same thing. So in this case, we have an ID and a class on the same thing, and they're both changing the background color. So like, which one's more important? And the way that works is a couple things. So the first thing is called specificity. And that is an easy way of saying your order of importance of the three different selectors. So in this case, a class is a selector, ID, and tag. Those are all called selectors. And so the order is ID is the most specific way you could get. So an ID is the most specific thing. So it's number one in the priority. So if you put an ID, it's going to first look at the ID and any styles that are tied to that. So that's why in this case, when we have a class and an ID, it's green and it's not the other two, even though it has all three on them technically at the same time. The next order of specificity is going to be your class. So class is number two, which is why these background colors, the red and black, are going to overwrite the blue. And then the last one is your tag elements. So this is if there's no classes, no IDs, or in this case, I don't want to say no classes, but there's no class that is changing the background color. No ID is changing the background color, and then it's going to go up to the tags. So the other thing that we didn't touch on, and I wanted to touch on really briefly, and I don't know if we even talk about it in here. I don't think we do, is something that I learned this week. And it's not, oops, wrong one. Here we go. This is a kind of a way to get around that order of importance. So let's say I really want this to take over. I really want it to be blue. I can add exclamation point important. And that's going to make everything blue. So what this is actually saying is I'm kind of overriding those the specificity rules And instead I'm restarting and say, okay, even though this is just an HTML tag, I want this rule to be important. That means that's the first thing you should look at. And so that's why it turned to blue instead. And so now it's ignoring the other three that I have. Now, if you have multiple things set to important, then it's going to go back to your specificity. So if I add important to all of these, for example, the order is the same as it was before, because they're technically, since they're all important, that moves them all to the front of the list. But now we have to look at, okay, this is an ID, so it gets looked at first, and then you go to your classes, and then you go to elements. This is probably not something you're going to see very often. It's not used very much because, in my opinion, it's not very good practice. Because if you want to make something important, then you should write the style appropriately to make it important. If it's important, you should probably make it an ID for a class or something, a separate class. Because if you really wanted it to be blue, you could always just say, I want this to be blue, and make the background color blue in a separate class. Oh, it's very hard to type when a dog is licking your hands. Make the background color blue instead of saying this. Let's just go back here and say, what? So it gives me the same result that I wanted originally, but I don't have to worry about the important. And then that's just less I have to think about. You know, whenever you're looking at your code, you don't want to be like, okay, what's my order of importance, my specificity? And then like, oh crap, there's this important tag on one of them, so I have to look at that one first. It just makes it a lot easier to understand later down the road. Does anybody have questions about that? I know I kind of really quickly went over that review from last week, plus the cascading stuff. And I know it's pretty complicated, but this is kind of the basics of like, this is what cascading style sheet is. Yeah, period's a class, and then the hashtag is an ID. So when you do a hashtag, so like to make this green show up, the selector is called ID. So you have to add an ID onto your element, and I'll say green. So this, when I talk about selectors, right, this period is just saying like, oh, this, like we said, this is a class, and then this is the name of the class. So I can name it whatever I want. I don't have to name it blue. I can call it, this is supposed to be blue, right? And then whenever I want to use it, I have to go down here and use it. So I know I did that last week when I was just naming them the color just because it's easy, but it's whatever you want to call it. So your selector is first, and then your name, and then whenever you want to use it, you do the selector. So in this case, the word class is our selector, and then we put the name in the quotation marks. Same thing goes for ID. Hashtag is our selector, so we type ID equals, and then in the quotes we put the name of the ID we're trying to use. Does that make sense? Good, cool. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
So is the class not needed whenever you're using the ID?
Right, you don't have to have the class there. I can take this, this class is no longer doing anything in this case, right? The only case where you would want to keep the class is like, say for whatever reason, you had a different set of styles on that class. So the way this works, it didn't work at all. Oh, that's because half of them are red. That's not what I want. Background color. Cool. That work? No, it didn't. Good too. Come up with a quick example to show you this. So in this example of, okay, we are using the red class, but it's actually got a different size. So I made this one a different size, which is actually throwing off the rest of the things, but that's okay. So I'm saying when you say that you use the red 2 class, you can make it red, but also increase the width and height. Well, now, if you look at our green square, it's, since I have class red 2, it's grabbing the background color from green because it's the ID. We're gonna get that one first, but it's still using this 80 width and 80 height because that red 2 class is on it. So that's where the case of like, you wouldn't want to get rid of your class if you had other stuff you were trying to make use of. But in this scenario, since we were just using background colors, you can just get rid of this class because it's not really needed, right? And that's where also, this is why I don't necessarily use IDs all that much personally, just because you can get the same result from just manually saying, make this a green square. Just have a green class that changes the black background color. Cool. So let's get into some more styling stuff, some more interesting styles. We'll start with the background colors. I know we've done this before as we were just playing around with it. But just kind of like checking it out here is you can add a background color to basically anything and change the color, just like we were doing with the squares. You can make the whole page a certain background color or anything like that. Where it gets fun is we get into background images. So we can actually make something and the background of something an image and then put things on top of it, right? So that's where you see some different like websites where they have text overlaying some picture or something. This is kind of where we would do something like that. So if we wanted to do that, I'm kind of giving it away over on the right because I ran it earlier. But this is what the code would look like. So we have a background image of a cat on this div. And it has, we gave it a size of 400 or 700 by 400. And then inside of the div, we wrote, I have a cat behind me. So the text goes on top of that. So what we're saying here is that every time I make a div, make this picture be the background of the div, and this is how big it should be. So if I do another one, even without putting words in it, we're going to have another cat picture. And it's going to be that size because I told it to be that size, right? What if I made a, I don't know, a class here called our picture. And I said it should be 200 by 300. And I said that. So our picture is actually smaller in this case because it still has the background from this first div, but I said, okay, since the class is going to take is more important, let's change the size of it. So that's where we get the cascading of like it goes down from the top level and then we can edit it as we go. Crap. So yeah, and then you can do all kinds of different stuff. Right, there's a center tag, so I can center the text on the page. And move it around and do all kinds of stuff with this. Those are background images, a lot like background colors, but there's other things you can do with background images. So the default is repeating. So let me see if I do this. Let's make this like 800 by 5. Now, you see what happened here? The original image that we used is 400 by 700 pixels. So by default, what's going to happen is if I try to make it bigger than the original image, it's going to start duplicating itself. So if you see, and we've got these different sections where it, tries to repeat and get bigger. So if I make this like the size of the whole screen, right, I'd have a bunch of cat pictures. But there's some different options that we can pass into the background image to change that. So we've got no repeat. Let me see here and make sure I know what this looks like. Okay, yeah, so it's just background repeat. So if I add on here, even though I told the image to be bigger, it's actually not going to show because it's not, I told it not to repeat, right? So even though I made the div itself is bigger, the image is only going to be as big as the original image, right? And I can also do the repeat X or repeat Y, which is basically have it repeat vertically or horizontally. So if I wanted to have a bunch next to each other or a bunch vertical, it could do that. So what's nice about stuff like this is what we've been doing is a lot of, like, we grab a picture from the internet, right? And upload it. And that's not always the best way to do it. So if you want, you could do we can do what we call a relative link, which is if I took a picture, say, let's see if I actually have any pictures on my computer. Maybe not. Probably deleted that one. Let's just take a screenshot of this. Don't mind me. Save it. And I'm actually testing something at the same time, so this will be interesting to see if this actually works. It's not what I wanted to do. Okay, there we go, new file. Oh, I can't. Okay, I was gonna try. But if you had, say, a picture like this, and you had it in your project, so if I was using a regular like code editor or something, and I put that picture in there, I could say, instead of like image URL from the internet, I could just be like, slash fish tank. Why don't I have whatever the image is? PNG, JPEG. Nope, there's no anything. So you just slash fish tank in this case. And so if that file was in the same folder as my project, I could grab it from there, right? So if I wanted to test it, let's go back to my test folder. That is not what I thought it was. Oh well. Let's not do that. That's going to take too much time. I'll have to do that next week. I'll have to get some test environment set up for you guys, and I'll show you how you could set up some relative paths for images. But yeah, just trust me for now. If you set it up in the existing project, it will be able to read that image, and that way you can guarantee it's always there. So that's the idea. Like if you try to look on the internet, that website might get shut down, that Google might take the image off or something. You always want to be able to use the relative paths. Right. So this is also something else we can do. We can do background attachments. So let's go ahead and throw this on here and run this. So what this is doing is I have this background image, but I'm making the height really big, and it's allowing me to scroll. So technically, let me actually throw a border on here to show you. Okay, so if you can see this border, it's a little hard to see. Also, feel free to let me know if I need to.
You can run it in a new window. If you see right below run code.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that you can see the border. Right, so this is how big we've made the div. The image is only this big, but what we've said is I can scroll to see it. It is actually better to see here because it adds the scroll bar to be it's this big and this tall, this wide and this tall. So that's kind of nice to be able to put the attachment on there. What are their attachments? Gotta see my keyword. Oh, God. So this other one I just added, I set the attachment to fixed in this case. And so what that does is that the image has a fixed position, but if I scroll my screen, the text actually moves with it. So the image is always going to be there, but text moves with it. So if I come in here and scroll, the text goes off screen, but the image stays there. So it's kind of interesting. I've never actually seen that before, so it's pretty cool. And then we've got positioning. So again, when we're using a background image like this, and it doesn't necessarily take up the entire screen, we can position that image wherever we want. So in this case, we just set it to the center. And so our text is going to be up here still, but we position the picture to be in the center of the screen. Right? Or it's in the center of the div, not necessarily the screen. Yeah, we gotta go. There you go. And your position options are top, center, bottom, left, and right. Any questions on the background image attachments? And just a quick refresh, in order to get the attachment, the background attachments, you just say background dash attachment, scroll fixed. Same thing with the repeating. So we have background dash repeat, and you can say no repeat, or the default is repeat, or you could share repeat X, repeat Y. I'm sorry, Adam, I totally missed your question earlier, but. All right, on to text formatting. So we have done a little bit of this when we got into some styling, but we're going to go again a little bit more in depth, just like we did with the backgrounds. So let's start with this first one. We've got blue text. So the first thing is we've got these two classes, and we have this color attribute that we've added to the classes. And the way most CSS works, and the way I kind of try to teach myself about it too, is you have color and background color. Right? Your background color is pretty straightforward. It's your background color, but everything else is going to be blue. So like if I draw something on the background of inside, if I put anything inside of this div, it's going to be blue, any text or anything like that. Now images, of course, it's going to be whatever image it is. But if I had something that drew a square or a circle or something, it's going to come up as blue because I've set the color to blue. So it's almost like if you were painting on a canvas, right? The background color would be whatever color your canvas is. So say on this example, I'm on a red canvas, and anything I put on there is going to be blue until I say otherwise. So that's where we get our text color from. So in this case, we have this color blue. But what's interesting about this is we have two different ways of doing the same thing. So we have color blue, which is built into HTML to understand like blue, red, yellow, as you've seen us do pretty much the whole time we're here. It's easy. And then but we also have the hex color for blue. We've talked briefly about hexadecimal numbers and letters. Basically, this is a code that can give you pretty much any color you could ever want. And so in this case, the 4 zeros, 2 Fs is blue, just the same blue as is stored in this keyword. But if I change that to something else, it's now black. I don't even know what colors these are. What am I going to get? Blue also? I'll have to grab the hex color and see. But that's why it's saying it's the same blue. It's just a different way of doing the same thing. What this allows us to do is we can use the blue and stuff, red, like we've been using for general easy things. But most of the time when you're doing web development, you want a custom color of some sort, right? You know, this blue isn't the exact blue you were thinking of, right? Same thing for a background color. And that's where you can set that, and then it'll set your text color. So before, also, when we get into text form, some more text formatting, if I wanted to make something italic, I could just take this off really quick. If I want to make this italic, I would wrap it in an I. So I have this italic text. But again, there's other ways to do this. If I create a class, and inside the class, there's something called font style, and I can give it italic. So if I use that class here, I get the same result. So this saves you from having to write your write the I tag on every single one. Realistically, this is just as much typing, but it's nice because it makes it a lot cleaner and easier to read instead of seeing I div everywhere. It's like, this is a div and we're gonna make it italic. Then we also have the oblique, which, what is oblique?
I'm not sure.
Okay, more or less the same thing. I was like, I couldn't tell you. It's the same. That's interesting. Never heard of that before. But yeah, it's the same thing. It looks to be like, yeah, it's the same. Same thing goes for bold. So instead of a font style, you can give it a font weight. So if I wanted to do this, the reason it's different than italics is because you want to be able to do both. So we have font style and font weight. So style is your italics and then weight is bold. And we've got our underlines, strike throughs, and lines. Let's just copy this one over here. So same kind of thing, underlining, just like your italics and bold, but in this time it's a text decoration, is what they call it. So you got your underline, overline, and line through, your strike through. Never used an overline before, I don't think.
Yeah,
I'm curious in what situation I would want one of those, but that's kind of cool. Didn't know it was a thing. So same thing. So we've got text. We got, wait a second, let me go back and make sure. Font style, font weight, and text decoration for the three main ways. You know, if you think like in Microsoft Word, where you've got your bold, italic, underline, all right there. That is how you do those three. All right, now we're going to get to the some fun stuff. I think this is fun. Is your font properties, right? So changing the actual text itself. So this is where we're going to get into some interesting ways of doing stuff. And I think you guys will start to see a kind of some similarities here in the fact that there's always more than one way to do the same thing when you're writing code. There's never like a one right way of doing anything. There's a lot of different paths you can take to get to the same result. And so this gives you pretty much the exact same reason. So we've got font size here, and we've added classes to all these that we've just created to be able to use them. So we've got small, medium, and large are like keywords to use for font size in this case. And we've also hard coded it to 12, 30, or 12, 20, and 30 pixels, right? So 30 pixels being the biggest, 20 being middle, and then we got our 12. So small, medium, large, I don't know off the top of my head what the exact numbers are, but it looks like small is about 12 point, medium is probably like 14, 16, something like that. And large is, I think, just under 20, looking at this. You know, we just called it, again, this class name has no actual meaning other than you're using it to key off of. Same thing. So we can change the size of our font, and we can do all kinds of stuff. So I can make it 300 pixels. I have no idea how this is going to work. Look at that. I'm 300. Just didn't change that. or you can make it 30 or 50 or whatever you want. Then we get into, excuse me, the font family. This is where you get to change the actual font style of the text you're typing, right? Oh, this is interesting. Monospace times New Roman. So the divs are Furica, Comic Sans. I'll read through this. So we need to have names wrapped in quotations. This would be good if I knew the difference between all of these different font styles. This is why I know Matt did this stuff. So basically what we're saying is I'm giving a list of font names for the divs to choose from, right? In this case, you can give it a list, or you could just give it one. What happens here is when it asks, what do you think my font will be? The browser doesn't know what Furica or Comic Sans is in this case, for whatever reason. And so it goes straight to the Helvetica, however you say that. So this actually isn't doing anything because the browser just doesn't know what it is. Same thing here, it's not making it to the Times New Roman because it doesn't know what that is, or it's already, oh wait, yeah, it does. I lied. It's doing both. So this is where it's going to get confusing with the font family stuff. You can add more than one font family to the font. So we're monospacing, but then we're also throwing Times New Roman on top of that. Not gonna lie, I don't think I've ever tried to do this before, like with multiple font families. So this is actually something new to me. That is cool. That is good to know. So yeah, if you wanted to change the font, you just go font family and then the name of whatever font you're looking for. So this is just your regular Times New Roman. Now, if you notice, we have some with quotations, some without. The reason for that is if the font has spaces in it, so if the name of the font has spaces, you need to wrap it in quotations. If it doesn't have any spaces, you don't have to use the quotation. Generally, when I'm writing code though, I'm typically going to put quotations on everything just to make it easier to understand. It's not going to hurt it either way. This doesn't do any difference. It's still going to come out the same. So that way you just know that that's not going to be a problem if you're missing quotations somewhere. Helvetica and Times New Roman. Are there any questions about changing the size or font family? Nope. All right, so let's go into text align. So let's grab this. This is where we get into being able to move our text around. Run this. Let's see here. There we go. This will make it a little better. Okay. I know this may be kind of hard to read, but I want to make this big so you can see. So we have on our styles here, we created four classes: a center, left, right, and justify. That's because there's 4 different options for text, for aligning your text: center, left, right, and justify. So what we're doing here is the first one, the first class is we just have that center class. We're saying text align center. it's going to align the text in the center. Again, with the Microsoft Word thing, it's kind of similar where you can, make your text align to the left, right, or center. This is doing the exact same thing. So if you see on the next one, we have left. So the text is always going to line up on the left. And then here, it's trying to line up on the right. So it's always going to go to the end here. So even on the short one, it ends up over here. And then justify. I gotta see what justify means. I don't know. I have a feeling it's try to fill the space. Let me make sure of that. This thing like glitches out if I go too fast to make it bigger. So, sorry, Matt Lane, gonna delete your wonderful text. Oh, that was too far. Yeah, so the idea is it's just going to try to go from one to the other. So it's basically like left align, pretty much the same. We can also indent our text. Oh, that's a big one too. So again, same thing, text dash indent is our attribute. And then in this case, it's the same as your padding and margins, as we've talked about before. And we're going to get more into those later. But we've got percentages, pixels, and EMs. Does anybody remember what the EMs do or what they mean? Nobody? That's okay. The EM stands for, I don't know, actually don't remember what EM actually stands for, but I know it does. This is the same thing as saying 3 times the current size. So whatever the defaults, the current size is, 3 times that in terms of font size, so pixels. So if the font size is set to 12, it's 3 times that, 3 times bigger than what it would have been from the default. So we've got all kinds of stuff here. So we've got percentages, lengths. Yep, same things. This is actually just telling you what you can do to indent. And you just add the class on the text. Units. Any questions on the indentation? Which one's the biggest one? Yeah, so 10%. The percentage in this case is saying like a percentage of the screen. So if I do like 90%, it's going to try to do the indent 90% of the screen. So it starts way over here. So that's when we're dealing with percentages. It's all in relative, I guess I shouldn't say screen size. It's relative size of whatever it's in. So in this case, it's in a div, which is going to go, the whole length of the screen. So it's going to try to indent it, whatever piece of the screen. And last but not least about text is transformation. Real simple. This is capitalization, lowercase, uppercase. Now, there we go. Capitalize, lowercase, and uppercase. So same format, we've got a class and it's text dash transform for these. And then we can capitalize all the letters. So if we say capitalize, we've got the first letter of each word is going to be capitalized, as we can see, and then lowercase, uppercase. Pretty straightforward, right? Now, that being said, this without these, like the way a div works, it's just going to go off of whatever case you did it. So if I capitalize, right, the the F here in first, it's going to use that exact case that I used whenever I typed it, unless I tell it to do something else. So this is nice when you're trying to like format some text. Say you had a text that you were given or something like that, that you didn't necessarily type into your code. You're able to say, okay, let's capitalize the first word, or let's capitalize all of it, or lowercase all of it, to make it easier to work with and read. Okay, so that was a lot of text properties and font family stuff. I know I kind of went through it pretty quick, but it's a lot of the same stuff. It's just knowing the selectors is the big thing. So definitely, if you ever need to, feel free to come to this page, the CSS page, and look back through this to get your properties and things if you need them. So like just a reminder, we've got colors to change the text color. Font style will give you italics. Oblique, again, same thing. Font weight is where you would put bold if you want it to be bold. Text decoration is if you need to do underline, strike through, anything like that. Of course, font size will change the size of your font. Font family is where you're going to get the font styles and change based off of which family list you've put in. Again, you need to have quotations if there's spaces. Text align to pick how it aligns, whether it's center, left, right, justified. Your indentation, text dash indent, and then the transform that we just went over, which is your text dash transform. So you capitalize, lowercase, uppercase. Any questions about that stuff so far? Nothing? Guys, just getting it. It's all making sense. Good. Good deal. All right. Let's move on to lists. So same thing as before. We've done this before with styling our lists, right? But instead of doing everything inline, we define all of our styles up here, right? So let me grab this big list of stuff. All right, so we've got our lists, got our unordered list and our ordered list. So if we remember, we had different types of lists. So the bulleted lists or the ordered list where you have numbers and Roman numerals. This is just like that, with the exception of creating classes for them instead of defining them inline. So before we would just say type equals circle to do the open circles. So no change there, right? Or I could change this to square, this type. Right? No change. But instead, we have it set up to do classes. Right? So we have a class set up for disk, which is your standard bulleted list. So the circle is the filled in circle. The circle, which is your open circle, squares, decimals. And then we've got decimal in this case is 1, 2, 3. Your when it says decimal, it's the decimal numbers, right? So 1 through 9. And then uppercase Roman numerals, lowercase Roman numerals, uppercase alpha, which is alphanumeric. So ABC, you could do lower alpha 2 for lowercase a, b, c, d. So yeah, just like before. And then in this case, it's list dash style dash type. So in this case, you can kind of see, normally I would just say type equals this, that's actually going to save you some time. Just because like in this case, I mean, like you have to write a lot more than just saying type equals, circle or type equals alpha, right? But where it gets fun is when you want to mix and match things. So if I go down here to the bottom, I'm starting with an ordered list with uppercase Roman numerals. And then I have another list inside of that list that's going to use lowercase Roman numerals, and then even change it to classes, decimals and stuff. If you're going to be like reusing things, it's nice to be able to say, this is what I want to use for the list. But again, it's the same thing as before. Like you could always just say type equals this, if I remember right. And get the same thing. So just another way of doing the same thing. Like always, there's no right or wrong way. This one requires a little more typing, and generally programmers just aren't a fan of typing. They want to type as little as possible. Any questions on lists and changing the type of lists?
Are you gonna send these to the Slack?
Yeah, I can
Thing.
post this in here.
Okay.
Let me do that right now. I know in our channel, I have the HTML site pinned, and I will pin this one also. So I just posted it in there. It's the same site, but it's just different files. So this one's for the CSS. And this will go over everything. So if you ever needed to look back at it, feel free. It's always going to be there for you guys to reference. All right, so let's get into some fun things. So what if I wanted to make a list that instead of using your normal like numbers, letters, I wanted to make it a picture as my list, selector, right? So let's see what we can come up with. We have a cat GIF. So in order to do this, we've created our style for list items in this case. And we gave that list item tag a background image, just like we talked about before. So this is where we're using our background image. So every list item is going to have a background image. And then no repeat. And this other line right here, line 8, is important. So list style type is none. So the reason we do that is we want to make sure that that the bullet still doesn't show up, right? So that's what prevents the original, styling to show up. And then we're setting some padding on it to get it in the correct place in this case. So if I don't have a padding there, it's going to be a little bit weird. So we're throwing some padding and some space on there to make it look cool. So we're saying the ordered, unordered list, we're giving it the disk class, which in this case actually doesn't matter. But if I even say like type, it's the default type anyway. So given the default type, it doesn't use it. Now, just to see, how could I do this without changing the list item style to have a background image? Is there a different way I could make a list that has a cat GIF before each item? possibly. No takers. Let me give you a bit of a hint. It's going to be more code, but what if I said, here's a div, and there's a couple different ways I can do it. Let's start with this one. What about this? So if I didn't have this on here, I could accomplish the same thing. I need to do that.
Where'd all the cats go?
I got rid of some of them, but we'll add them back. Watch. So I could just add an image in front of all of these, and we get kind of the same result. Now, the only difference is the text is now like on the bottom because I haven't positioned it. So if I grab my padding and stuff, oh, that's not what I want on that image. Yeah, I'd have to play around with some different padding to get it just for where we have it. But this is just another way of showing like same thing, just different way of doing it. So instead of adding the image on each one, I just added the background image to the list item and it added cats in it.
I like that one.
Now we're going to add some height and width. Again, seen this before, but this time not where you may have thought it was. So we've done this with pictures, right? We're giving them a height. You know, whenever we bring in pictures, we want to make sure we give them a size to fit, you know, whatever place they want. Otherwise, they'll take up as much room as they can. But you can also give size to pretty much anything, any div or class or tag. So in this case, we're showing some different ways you can do that. So the first one that we have is auto. Really, we never need to use this because it's the default value is automatic. So which basically means like it's going to be as big as it needs to be. And what I mean by that is I could take this and make it really big and it can continue to grow, right? And then the next ones we're using a percentage again. So again, we're making it 50% of, in this case, the width of the screen because a div takes up the entire width of the screen. So this one's half of the screen. What happens if we do this? It's always going to be half of the screen. So it's never going to go past that point. It'll only scale down vertically. And then same thing goes for the 500 pixels. In this case, it's a little bit past half the screen, but it won't go any farther. So what's cool about this is you can start nesting things. So say I wanted to put another div in here, right? And I give it the class. And we're going to give it border 2. So what's going to happen when I run this code? How big is this div on line 15 going to be? So for a little bit of a hint, so when we're talking about cascading styles, so I started with a div that is 50% of the screen because I gave it the half class, okay? And then another level down inside of that div that is 50% of the screen, I said, okay, tag that half class onto here, right? But in this case, I don't get to use 50% of the screen. I'm saying I need you to be half of whatever your parent component is. So in this case, it should be 25%. So it's 25% of the screen. Because it's going to be half of this parent component. And I can continue doing this for as long as I'd like, right? I mean, I can continue saying, 25 over 2, so we're at what? No. Oh, geez, what's there we go, right? So now we're 12.5% of the screen. So we're going to continue cutting it in half every time. Does that make sense to everybody? I know that's kind of confusing, but that's where CSS kind of is. That's kind of why CSS is really powerful. It can be used for a lot of things. So now what? I do that. So for fun, this is kind of an interesting thing. We have to be careful about the styles that get cascaded down, because in this case, I said, okay, we're going to put a div here that's only going to be half of the screen. But what if I tell this one to be bigger than that, right? I say, I don't want you to be half the screen. I want you to be 500 pixels. So this is where, when we're mixing percentages and pixels, it gets kind of complicated and difficult to figure out what's going on. Because if you see here, this container that says it's 25% is actually extended past there. So if I put, a graph or something or images, it will overlap and not line up correctly. So what I usually tell people is, if you can, stick with percentages as much as possible, because a percentage is always going to be a certain percentage of the screen and also a percentage of its container. So you're never going to go outside of those bounds, right? So just like we did with 25%. It also makes everything way easier to lay out, because as I grow and shrink this screen, the percentage still stays the same, right? So it's always 50% or 25%. And what this allows you to do, if you're always using percentages, it's kind of like your app that you've made, or your website in this case that you've made for a desktop computer, is usable for the most part on a phone, right? On a really small screen, because even though the screen is smaller, you've used the percentages of the current screen size to try to shrink it down and make everything work, right? Now, if you make the screen size really small, if it'll let me, your text is going to start wrapping and it's going to look a little weird, but everything's going to be on screen and you'll be able to use it.
Is there a way to set, like, I don't know how to say it, like a certain border for the words? Like if I change, like if I scan this on my phone,
Mhm.
the format is going to change a little bit. And is there a way to like make it not go, like not change after like div and just like shrink instead, if that makes any sense? Like the second box.
So make the text smaller or
I don't know how to explain it.
let me think. So so you say when you scan this on your phone, it
Oh,
would
okay,
pull
so
up and yeah, go ahead.
it will it will stay like that, and it will have me scroll to the side instead of just staying on the.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So what's supposed to happen? So if you see like this has like a min width, right? Set by default. So like if I created this, here, actually, let's just do this. I'll test it in a real browser. I'll make it a lot easier. Save that. Open it and let's shrink it down. So if you kind of see is this has like a minimum or a minimum width for some reason, like the browser is built in to say like the screen can only go, I can't make it any smaller, right? So if the phone is like not as wide as that minimum width, it will like make you want to scroll, right? Because it can only go so small. Does that help? I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm assuming that's what's happening. In order to, if you wanted to make it like fit on the phone screen, like if you wanted to change the styling to fit, we can totally do that. Let's see. And there are like more complex ways to be like, am I on a phone? Like there is a way to kind of get the screen size of the current device that we won't necessarily get into, which helps a lot. But realistically, like when we're writing in the HTML, like basic HTML, CSS, it's meant, at least originally, to be on a desktop computer. So they want to be so wide. But so if you wanted to say like, okay, let's see, we're gonna make the div a width of do like 50%. And then I don't know exactly if this is going to turn out how we want, but it may help. That did not work. Okay. This is where we would use like the pixels to say divs have to be what? I can't do that. Oh, that's, never mind. I can't. Don't mind me. We're doing some testing. Screen. Let's make it. What you can do if you're like developing specifically for like a phone, this would be like hard coding it, but what you could do is if you figure out exactly how many pixels wide and tall the phone is, you can it's stuck. go to your top level. So if you wanted to wrap like the entire thing in a div that was like this, and you called it I create a class called this. So what this is kind of doing, and this is like saying like, okay, this is my app, right? This is how big my app is. It's going to be 500 by 1000. Right? This is what you get to work with. Let's even make it small. Let's do 250 by maybe. There we go. It kind of looks like a phone screen. I don't know. So what we're doing is at the very top level, this is where we get down to our cascading. We're setting a hard-coded width and height of like, okay, nothing's allowed to be bigger than this, or this is the size of the container, the thing we're working in. And so everything after that, we would want to make sure is using like a percentage, right? To not to respect that. So we're always doing a percentage of this 250 by 600, right? So if I say half on the width, again, so we're gonna go 50% of that 250 and then 50% again. Same thing as the height, right? So if I do something like half here, actually, let's just make the whole thing. This thing does not like to format very well. If I say the height's also going to be 50%. See, we're always scaling it down. That way, what this allows us to do is we can do different like columns and stuff. So I can have a div here and then another one here. Let's see what happens here. Oh, maybe not a div. Maybe I want. I need like them to be in a column, right? Yeah, I'd have to lay them out in like a column size. Oh, that's what I wanted. This is what I meant to do, sorry. See, it lets us like go, the weird thing is like it's gonna let me go past that point. So if I went too far in this case because the border, but you'll wanna just watch out for that whenever you're actually doing your designing. Because it's not gonna like throw an error and be like, no, I can't be bigger than 250 by 600. But you'll just have to make sure it works for that. I have no idea if that actually answers your question very well. I kind of went on a tangent, but it is an interesting way of seeing like how you can create things as a certain size.
So when you have the border, if you write anything inside that border, will it cross the border? If that makes sense.
No. Well, you know what? Let's find out. I don't know what happens vertically. It might, like, yeah. So if it's not tall enough, it will. So, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't cross it left to right.
So do you say width and then height in the style? Is that how you set the
Yes.
border?
Yeah. Oh, the border part, like
Yeah.
so where it doesn't go across. Yeah. So the width, like the border automatic, like the text won't go past that. For height, I want to say I have to look and see if there is a specific style that says, you know, if the text overflows.
I'm not sure if like max height does that.
Let's find out. Do a quick Google search. Yeah, there's no easy way to do it, I guess I should say, for the text overflow, I think. Let me just make sure. Or maybe there is. Here we go. Let's try this. Let's go to the div. So now, if I do this, there is a way. I found it. Okay. So what I've done is on the div, I've set the overflow property, the attribute, to hidden. So what that does is if it goes past the box, it just doesn't show up anymore. You can also set it to ellipse. Nope. No, ellipsis. I can't spell. There we go. It did not. Why did you not work? Does this work? No. There's supposed to be like an ellipsis one. Let's see what these documentations do. Visible scroll, auto, and then white space. No wrap, pre-wrap, pre-line, break spaces. Okay. So to answer your question, I guess hidden will give you what you wanted in order to not let the text go past that vertical line. So, and if you wanted it to not wrap, so say I wanted, usually an example of this, I have a hard time talking and typing. It's not over crap. What was it called? I gotta go back because I can't remember. White space, no wrap. Okay, there we go. I did this on a class, and say I went up to the app and I said, it's long enough. I'm going to tell this not wrap to not wrap. So if you see here, basically I'm saying like the text is not allowed to wrap around to the new line, and it's also not going to show. So it's just going to be like cut off at the end. This no wrap stuff, or is a lot of times is used in search boxes. So like if I'm searching something and it gets really long, or in a text box, if you want to display it, so you want to have like a, say like, no, I don't want it to wrap and move everything else around. Typically you would do that. I could have, there's, maybe I'm just not spelling ellipsis right. But there's supposed to be like an ellipsis overflow in which it does the 3 dots. I don't know why that's not working. There must be some other way to do it. I'm not doing it right. So if you can figure that out, that'd be cool. Does that help too with understanding the text wrapping? Awesome. Wow, we are so close to time. I was not paying attention to time. That's okay. Are there any other questions or anything that you're curious about?
Did I miss a quiz in the beginning? Sorry, I was late.
We did not do any quizzes. We
Okay.
did a quick review of
Okay.
the CSS stuff and then kind of got into some more
Okay.
CSS.
Well, I'll do the recording then.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No problem. All right, so let's get into, I know you guys, I made you guys do this at the beginning when we first started doing HTML, but we're gonna do the create your own website thing again, but this time using styles instead of like inline styles like we were before. I want you to use CSS. So in CodeHS, there's a place to do this. You don't have to do it here necessarily. It's technically under the like create your home page. They have a place where you can set up like a domain through CodeHS and stuff like that, but you don't necessarily have to do that. You can do just in the sandbox like we've been playing around with, and create a page about yourself or about something interesting that you're super into or something. And I will post this in Slack because I want to see if we can get everything, but with using a background color or image. Let me write this down now so I don't forget also. All right. Color or image. CSS styles. So that means your classes, IDs, tags, a table. And let's do a link of at least one link. And I would like you guys to do all of your styles in the CSS, so inside of your style block, and not do the inline styles and stuff. And kind of try to use everything we've learned so far and see what you can come up with. Again, nothing's graded, but just feel free to either DM me or Duran or both of us, or just post it into the Slack channel like we've been doing before to see what you can do. But that is all I had for today. I'll stick around for a little bit. If you guys have questions, comments, or anything, just let us know.